This is Sarah Leslie with Go All In, helping entrepreneurs live the life they want to live right now, making the money they want to make the way they want to make it, while also living a rich and full life outside of their business. True personal freedom. Let's go. Hello, and welcome to Go All In. Today's episode, so excited about. It will be the last episode for this season. And of course, I will be back in January with new episodes. Super excited to bring those to you. And today's topic is all about resistance and understanding resistance so that you can have the things that you most want in your life. The only thing I believe that keeps us from creating exactly what we want in our lives is resistance. Okay. And I just think about it as the easiest way to understand why you haven't already created the results that you want for your life. And when I say results, I literally mean anything that it is in your life that you're desiring, whether that's in your personal life or in your business. If it's finances, income, clients, different projects in your business that you're wanting to see realized and to flourish, and also in your personal life, relationships that you're desiring, love that you're wanting to experience, adventures that you're wanting to take. If those things aren't happening, it is because of resistance. This topic has come up more recently as I was closing out the first round of the Creating Clients and Cash Flow Mastermind for coaches. And I was realizing just in some of the different conversations that we were having inside of the mastermind that that it would be helpful for me to go deeper into explaining what resistance was. If you're new to personal growth, if you're new to understanding self-sabotage and getting in your own way and some of those more cliche phrases, you may not have as deep of an understanding of resistance as you would benefit from having. And that's why I did the episode. I mean, honestly, even as a therapist myself for over 20 years, I didn't start to understand resistance at the degree that I understand it now until I was in my late 30s. So I just want to invite you, right, wherever you're at in your journey, to take a listen to this as if you've never heard of it before. And to really listen in with the understanding that if you can understand resistance and you can understand what it is that goes on inside of you that keeps you from actually having the things that you want, your entire life has the potential to radically change. That being said, wherever you're at, wherever you're feeling stuck, wherever you're feeling frustrated, wherever you're not already where you want to be, this episode is for you. I know for myself, I wanted more freedom. I wanted to travel. I wanted to feel deeply loved. I wanted that romantic partner. I wanted to feel more connection and intention with my family and the other personal relationships that I had. And I wanted to be able to provide a service in my business that felt really aligned and authentic. And for the life of me, I could not figure out how to bring all of these things together for my life, right? I was in my previous life, as I like to refer to it, and I was doing all of these things, and they seemed like I was doing the right things. And I had gotten to a really great place in my life where I was receiving the income I wanted to be receiving. Had a lot of friends. I had all of the things. And yet they weren't actually in the way that I wanted them. And so if you don't have what you want, then in my mind, you don't actually have what you want, right? Even if it seems like you're really close or the things are really good, if you don't have what you really want, then you just aren't going to feel that level of fulfillment and satisfaction regardless. And if you're anything like where I was at in my late 30s, I felt terrible that I wasn't satisfied with the life that I had. It was like I had all of these really great things on paper. And if anybody was looking in, they'd be like, wow, you have an amazing life. Own your own home. you've got this great job, you've got, great family, all this. And it still wasn't exactly what I wanted. I didn't have the freedom to travel. I was under, we'll say I was doing great work and I felt a lot of pressure and there were a lot of rules that I had to follow in order to provide the service. And so, just the long and short of it, it was like I was working some job that was really exhausting. And ultimately, I wasn't able to show up authentically the way I wanted to. And outside of the restraints that I was feeling and being put under, I needed to make a change. And again, I didn't understand what I needed to do in order to actually be able to make the real authentic changes that actually needed to be made. So, we're going to delve in and we're going to look at a handful of different areas to help you understand what's going on in your life. We're going to look at what is this thing, internal resistance, right? Because that's really what I want you to walk away with from today's episode is a really deep understanding of what resistance actually is, and then I'm going to touch a little bit on why we resist, right? What is it that goes on inside of us that causes us to be in resistance? And ultimately, what we're resisting is actually our own internal guidance. Why would we be resisting our own internal guidance? And then lastly, how do you actually move through resistance, right? How do you actually live a life, what I think of as non-resistant, like water, right? Where you could just flow in and out of and around whatever obstacles might pop up in your way. Getting us started with just the simple understanding of like, what is it when we're referring to internal resistance? So there are a lot of different definitions and ways of describing this thing called internal resistance. And just a simple way that you can think about it is an invisible force that holds you back when you try to move toward something that you want. Okay. So if you're desiring more love in your life, and as you move towards things that you think would allow for more love in your life, but it feels like you're hitting up against barriers, or you take action on different things, but like none of it seems to really unfold or actually get you where you want to go. What is actually being felt or experienced is this very thing I'm talking about, internal resistance. I also just like to think about it as anything that comes up inside of you that is keeping you from having what you want. For instance, you're wanting more money in your business and you find yourself saying, "I'm too busy" a lot of the times, then that's a pattern where you're seeing internal resistance. And part of what you can acknowledge or recognize as internal resistance is this idea that you're too busy to actually be able to make the money that you want to make. For a quick example. So, some really common ways that you understand or already know as resistance are procrastination, self doubt, perfectionism, overthinking, self sabotage, self judgment, criticism, anxiety. There are so many more. I could spend quite a while really delving into like the many ways in which resistance shows up. And I might do that on a future podcast, but I'm not going to go into too much more of it today. It's really, again, just noticing these different habits and patterns and ways of thinking where we get caught up and can't actually create or produce the result that we are currently going after. Okay? Sometimes it can feel like you don't have a choice in the matter, even though you know intellectually you always have a choice. We know intellectually you always have a choice to go after the thing that you're really wanting, to create what you're desiring. And when you don't feel like you have a choice, what you're coming up against is resistance. Okay. Okay. So I think, just bigger picture, right? Of course, like this matters because without being able to understand this invisible force, you just literally aren't going to be able to create the things that you want. And even in the times when you have the breakthrough and you're able to go ahead and create the thing that you want, you don't actually understand how you did it or how you overcame the internal resistance. And so it's not repeatable, right? And so if you don't really understand how, for instance, perfectionism is resistance, then when you have moments of breaking through and you write a really great post or you put on a really great webinar and you have some good traction or you get some good results, you think that it's because you spent so much time working on the thing and you had like just the right wording or just the right length or just the right call to action. You think that that's the thing that actually created the result, and it didn't. So you then go to repeat it and it doesn't bring you those same results. And again, you get super frustrated and you're like, why is this happening? Resistance is important to understand because you must be able to move through it in order to create those results that you're looking for. Resistance is the thing that is keeping people from the desired outcomes. When we remove the resistance, the only thing that's left is for them to be able to create their desired result. I had a client who came to me I was working with her a while ago, and she had come to me after already investing thousands of dollars into various programs to help her create a business and be able to do the sales, the marketing, the putting yourself out there to create the clients, right? She had invested at least a year before coming to work with me on various programs to be able to teach her all of the things that you need to know in order to, well, that a lot of places say that you need to know in order to create a successful business. And she was working really hard, doing all the things that she'd been taught to do, showing up to all the calls that she had signed up to be a part of. And yet she was not making the money that she wanted to make. And she didn't feel like the success was coming for her. And she also was having a lot of self-doubt. She was definitely having a lot of perfectionism, a lot of internal criticism and self-judgment, and overall just feeling really stressed and discouraged when I started working with her. And as we started working together, it became very quickly apparent to me, right? Really from those first 2 calls that I had with her, of course, you're not making the money that you want to make or feeling the success that you want to feel because you have all of this resistance going on inside of you. And so, again, when you don't understand that you having this like high intense standard for being able to put out content or being able to reach out to someone to offer a service to them, or you're spending a lot of time feeling like you're not successful or feeling like getting some kind of success is going to be really hard and difficult, that is resistance at play in action. And you're just simply going to have a very, very difficult time creating the results that you want if that's where you're spending your time. Okay. Because again, something I'm sure you've heard a lot of is that the place where you put your focus is the thing you're going to be creating. So the more we can see resistance as our teacher and not as our enemy, we'll actually be able to become more useful in helping ourselves move through resistance. So that is internal resistance, right? The most important thing for you to know and understand and walk away from is that anytime you're hitting up against an invisible force or you're noticing yourself feeling not good enough, feeling not successful, feeling anxious, having high amounts of self-doubt, self-criticism, you're in resistance. Okay, on to number 2. Why do we resist our own inner guidance, right? So like the root causes of resistance, which there are so many. And I think just if we were to group them all, I would be able to whittle it down to what I think of as 2 sides of the same coin: fear of failure and fear of success. Okay, so they're at opposite ends of the spectrum, so to speak, and also they're on the same spectrum. So we have this core feeling of fear that causes us to resist our own inner guidance. So when we're thinking about like, where does this resistance, like if I have all this going on, I have all this self-judgment and criticism and high standards of putting stuff out into the world, right? And in other words, known as perfectionism, anxiety. We have all of this going on inside of us. Like, where did it come from? Why is it there? And why are we having so much of this resistance? So the simple way of thinking about this is you've been conditioned to have the internal resistance that you currently have. So, however, resistance shows up for you, you were conditioned to have it. Okay. So, one of the ways that I like talking about it, because I think of the mind as a computer, and it has helped me radically to better understand the mind and how the mind actually operates, to think of the mind as a computer. And so, what I think of as my resistance is these places where I have learned certain programs, right? Like the program of perfectionism. That was something I was taught, and there are a bunch of different reasons, right? Of course, my parents had an impact, and the environment that I grew up in had an impact, and I was a firstborn child that had an impact. All of the factors, right, in your early childhood life have an impact on you creating various programs. So for me, certainly perfectionism is a program that my mind created in order to try to create the results that I wanted, in order to keep me safe in the world that I was living in order to protect me from feeling uncomfortable. And so I held very high standards for myself is a way of keeping myself safe, right? So if I had a really high standard and something didn't work out the way I wanted it to, like I didn't get the grade I wanted at school or I didn't get accepted. I remember in the fourth grade, I didn't get safety patrol. For fifth grade, going into the fifth grade, you get nominated for safety patrol, and I had just moved, right? And so I was able to refer to one of these programs like, oh, I haven't been here long enough. And I don't know enough people and the teachers don't know me well enough, right? As part of the reason why I didn't get nominated for safety patrol. For instance, if I didn't get the grade that I thought that I should get, oh, I didn't work hard enough. Of course, I didn't get the grade that I wanted. All of these instances, right, in our life, these experiences, we make a meaning, we interpret them, and we write a code. And when you write that code, you have enough of these experiences to solidify certain codes within your own mind for how and why things are happening to you. And so you hold on to those programs as you get older into your adult years, and you just continue to run them unconsciously. You're not like sitting down thinking about it, right? I don't sit down and think about, oh, I need to like really make sure I execute perfectionism. And it takes me like 2 hours to write a Facebook post before I put the post out there. Or I need to review my content for my podcast 100 times before I put it out there. I'm consciously thinking those things. Those things just happen because I've been running the code of perfectionism for so long. So used to be I would sit down to write a post for Facebook, for instance, and I sometimes would end up spending 2 hours doing that. Why? Not because I wanted to, but because there's a code, a programming, a conditioning within me that learned as a child, if I spend a lot of time and I work really hard on my writing, I'll get it to such a place where it surely will produce the result that I want. Am I making sense so far? Is this sounding familiar for you? So, of course, I could give so many different examples. When you think about programming, right? Ways of being that have been there for so long, ways of thinking that have been there for so long. So, if you're used to feeling anxious, that's another one of those programs that's probably just been there since you were a young child. If you're used to, like assessing and accommodating for the other people in your world. That's another program that we learn in early childhood that ultimately becomes a form of resistance in our own lives, right? So if we're constantly accommodating to the needs and wants of other people, we're not going to be accommodating and or following our own inner guidance. And so instead of following our own inner guidance, we're going to run into resistance because we're working this old program of accommodating for others. So when we remove the program, what we have is following our own guidance. When we stop accommodating and making changes based on what other people are needing in our world, then we just have trusting ourselves and we create those results based on our own inner wisdom. So, highlighting the idea here, right, as we're talking about old programs and that resistance that is in the form of old programs. When we go to change a program, so like for instance, when you go to change the accommodating program, it is going to feel so uncomfortable because, again, you were taught it early on. So it made a deep impression in your mind and it set that course of creating a neural pathway in your brain as the way to function in order to keep your world in place, in order to keep your world in a way that you could understand it, in a way that it made sense to you. So when you go to change it, right? And you're now at a point in your life where you're like, I got to do something different because like I'm super stressed or I'm just not creating the results that I want or I feel too anxious. I can't enjoy my life and I actually now have decided I want to enjoy my life. Or you no longer want to be super stressed in your business and you want to be able to create money easefully rather than from that place of anxiety and hustle. Whatever is true for you. When you go to make that change, right, and you want to release the resistance in one of those areas, whatever one is true for you, it's going to be so uncomfortable to change. It's going to cause so much uncertainty inside of you. So when you shift away from prioritizing what other people are needing or what you think you should be doing because of what other people or the market are going to want from your business, you shift into that resistance. You're now in that resistance and you like are now deciding, okay, I want to move away from this. I don't want to accommodate. I don't want to have this invisible force that pops up for me. I want to change it and I want to let myself really tap into what feels true and honest for me. There's going to be a part of you that's going to feel so uncomfortable, so uncertain with doing that, that chances are your brain will freak out and not allow you to make a decision or take action in that way. And so instead, more times than not, you'll flip back to the old way of doing it. And you'll find a very strategic way to be able to do that. Okay. So again, it's not that you can't do it. You can't do it a new way. It's just that the old way is so deeply ingrained and the old way has become the truth for you. And so when you're wanting to shift, you're wanting to change what's true for you, it's so uncomfortable, which is why people hire folks like me to help them. Because left to your own devices, more times than not, we'll go back to what feels like home. We'll go back to what feels like normal and comfortable. So instead of, for instance, reaching out to people and offering your services to them, you'll revert back to what feels most comfortable and want to create more content and spend time perfecting the content and make a post versus going out into the world, having conversations with people and making an offer to help them. For just an example. Okay. So in so many of my clients, again, I want to try to incorporate some different stories of what I've actually seen folks do and have happen for them. One of the clients that comes to mind when I'm thinking about trusting your own inner guidance and the uncomfortableness that happens from making that shift and understanding why we resist our own quiet voice, right? Or the voice of God. Some people will refer to that quiet voice inside of you as the voice of God. And so one of my clients who was a teacher, I worked with her again several years ago now, and
she came to me originally because she found herself teaching in the public school system and feeling miserable. And she came to me to help her to not be miserable anymore, to learn how to enjoy her life again, to figure out what was the resistance that was coming in and causing her to feel so unhappy. And it was so confusing to her because she had all of the right components. Again, you can have all the right components. She had a husband that she loves, a great job, wonderful people in her world, all the right components. And they just weren't in the way that she actually desired them. And so slowly, slowly, slowly over time, she became just totally miserable in a matter of a couple of years. That happens because she wants something different than what she has. And as she was going to make different changes to be able to have more of what she wanted, she hit that invisible force, as we've referred to it now as resistance. And she found herself feeling unable to make those changes she most needed to make. And also just experience a lot of confusion about what to do. Come to find out, as we like really are working together and we're removing things and we're allowing for more ease and we're allowing for less of that internal struggle and helping her to get more in alignment with what she truly wanted, right? We were helping her to tap into that quiet inner voice. What she quickly figured out as she got back into teaching that fall, and she tried to play by the rules that were, that are just there when you're working for someone else and you're in an institution. You have a lot of different rules and a lot of different people dictating how you should and shouldn't do things. What she came to understand quite quickly is that quiet voice inside of her was letting her know this system, this institution that we've been in for so very long is no longer serving her. It was no longer serving her. It was no longer the right environment for her to be in order for her to have the things in her life, the components in her life, the way that she actually desired them to be. So she had to clear out so much confusion and so many feelings of miserable and anxious and frustrated and disappointed before she could actually have access to that inner voice. And once she had access to that inner voice inside of her, she quickly realized, oh, I can no longer be here in this system. I have to actually step outside of this. And really, I want to teach. I love teaching and I want to keep teaching, but I have to be able to teach on my own terms. And so she came to work with me for another season where we created her own school, her own business, where she could actually dictate the terms of how she was going to teach, how much time she was going to spend doing this and that, and how much time she was going to spend in the other parts of her life, and also construct the other parts of her life in the way that actually felt in alignment for her, right? Again, creating a world for her that had non resistance, right? That was in non resistance to her own inner voice. And so, this is really what is at the heart of learning how to listen to your own inner voice, which is the place inside of you that does not experience resistance, right? It is the part inside of you that you're in conflict with when you're running these other programs that you learned of how you should and shouldn't be as a young person and you're still executing as an adult. You're coming into conflict with what your heart is truly desiring. And so, as we cleared out all of those shoulds and have tos and all of the programs that she was running that were actually contributing to her being unhappy, she then tapped into what her own inner wisdom was saying and how she wanted her own life to be. And that's when she literally broke free and had the biggest breakthrough of her entire life. Okay, so wrapping us up here, how to actually move through resistance. What I'm going to do is I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this, and then I'm going to create another podcast where I go into greater detail on how to actually move through resistance. Because again, today I really wanted you to walk away with understanding what resistance is and what's actually happening inside of you as you're experiencing resistance so that you can start to understand, oh, the reason I feel in conflict with myself is because of this thing called resistance. Okay. So, learning to move through resistance, right? Number one is having awareness. It's just literally the first step always is having awareness. So that's why I've spent so much time today helping you to understand what resistance actually is. Because until you understand it, you just really can't do a whole lot about it. And so now, as you move forward, you're going to have such a better understanding of what resistance is. And so you can start to ask yourself, where am I experiencing resistance in my life? What am I currently resisting? Both great questions that you can just literally spend, each day, each morning, every now and again, whenever you remember it, depending on where you're at in your journey, understanding what's really going on with you, where you're creating your own internal conflict. Okay. And part of what then has to happen as you're getting more awareness is not not employing more resistance as you discover your resistance. So, for instance, when you discover that perfectionism is actually a mechanism to slow you down from actually just getting your content or getting your action out into the world, whatever, action you're wanting to take, that all that time spent perfecting it is really resistance, right? Because you don't want to feel the failure that might come when you take that action. And so you're resisting feeling the failure and you're resisting ultimately learning from the failure or learning from the action. So again, until we actually have awareness that that is what's at play, we will just continue to execute on perfectionism. So, when you notice yourself spending 2 hours writing a post, or when you notice yourself spending 2 hours reviewing what you're going to say in this challenging conversation that's coming up, take notice of it and ask, why am I spending all of this time doing this? What is it that I'm actually avoiding right now? And when you ask yourself that question, you'll figure out what that fear is, right? You're feeling fearful of that feeling of failure. You put out the post, nobody responds. You put out a webinar, no one signs up. You sit down with your significant other and you have this hard conversation and they poo poo it, two thumbs down. You feel like a failure, right? So, whatever that thing is that you're actually trying to avoid by implementing perfectionism is really what you want to become aware of. So I just love the simple step of asking yourself, what am I resisting? What is it that I'm avoiding by spending all of this time doing this instead of actually in the action? Okay, awareness. So then we have to come to the awareness. And when we ask ourselves that prompt, the journal prompt, what is it I'm really truly avoiding? Then we have to apply compassion instead of what we most likely would do normally is apply more judgment, more criticism. Okay, so that's when you employ compassion and you just continue to get more curious. Okay, so ultimately, you go through that practice of becoming aware, applying compassion, and allowing yourself to take action quicker, right? And so you're constantly needing to ask yourself, what is it that I really want? What is it that that place inside of me, my inner voice, my inner wisdom, God, is actually calling me to? And as you hear the inner voice, and you become aware of the resistance, then the work is to take action quicker from the inner voice, right? On the inner voice wisdom without whatever the mechanism is that you've been employing, right? Of resistance. So if you're feeling super frustrated at the results that you have right now in your business and you want things to be moving faster, this would be the work that you would now start to do so that you can actually get different results, which is going to include not feeling super frustrated, right? It's like becoming aware of why are you so frustrated and then applying compassion instead of applying more frustration and going deeper into alignment with what your inner voice is actually calling you to do. So instead of spending a lot of time in frustration, you actually spend more time just taking action, even when it feels hard to do it, right? Because again, taking that action is going to feel hard initially, most likely, because it's going against the way that you have been acting for many, many, many years. So if you're used to taking action from feeling frustrated and you're practicing now taking action from feeling good and from having trust, at first it's going to feel uncomfortable. Okay, so just to summarize, and again, I'm going to go into greater detail in a future episode on how to move through the resistance because again, that is something I'd like to actually just take the entire episode to help you with because it's so important. Okay, so in closing, I want you to really take away, right? Resistance is a signal, it's not your enemy. Resistance is there to teach you where you're experiencing that internal conflict with what is actually true for you. The place of resistance is always going to be in some kind of old program that you learned were conditioned to believe from childhood. Okay. So it's actually always very simple to find. It's harder, right? The place where it comes in to be hard is actually moving through the resistance. So I want you to notice the resistance is those old programs, those old patterns, those old ways of taking action. And the thing that will feel harder is moving through the resistance. And the way to get you started moving through the resistance is becoming aware of the resistance itself, getting more curious, understanding what's really going on there, and then trusting yourself to take aligned action steps with your own inner wisdom, right? That quiet, still voice within you. Okay, so again, big recap of the whole episode. Understanding resistance is that invisible force that you feel yourself hitting up against where you won't allow yourself to create the results that you want. And it's literally anything that you're hitting up against and feeling like, oh, I just can't get through it. That is resistance. For a future episode, I'm going to go into greater detail on the mechanisms and the steps to follow to actually move through that resistance even more clearly. And I'm going to end with a story about a client who had so much resistance to being able to create the money that he wanted to create, right? He was really excited about creating $50,000 in his business and put a number in there that sounds really exciting to you, and don't let yourself get triggered by this idea, by this goal that he had to make 50,000 per month in his own business. But he had so much resistance. Now, again, he didn't understand what resistance was, so he didn't realize that he had the resistance, nor did he realize the many ways in which his old programming was keeping him from being able to create the money and being able to feel really good when he was creating the money. He and I started working together, and he became aware that he had inherited this programming from his dad, who was also an entrepreneur, about how creating that amount of money had to feel really hard. He had to work really hard and be really busy, like put the majority of his time and attention into his business, right? Even though he didn't actually want to do that. He really wanted to put time and attention into being a dad and time and attention into being a husband. But his programs would not allow him to take action in that way. And so he found himself, even though he had these desires, he would continuously find himself being over here, spending all of his time in his business trying to create this money, working really hard, spending a lot of time in his business, and also doing things that he wasn't excited about doing. And so, what he found himself doing is spreading himself very thin and ultimately feeling really tired. And so, again, we had to, in our work together, we helped him get really clear on the things that he was doing that were creating this internal resistance inside of him and allow him to actually decrease the amount of time he was spending in his business, devote more time to being an amazing partner and an amazing dad. And as he started to come into more alignment with what his heart was truly desiring, what his inner voice was actually telling him, he was actually able to start to create that $50,000 a month. And he did it relatively easefully. Why? Because we helped him remove those old programs that led to old behaviors that led to the results he didn't want. And so we put in new behaviors, new actions from that aligned place inside of him, which led to new results. In other words, making that $50,000 a month and feeling really good about it. Okay, so that's just an example of when you put all of these steps into practice, the results that you can easily allow to happen in your life. Wherever you're at in your own personal journey, start to take notice where that resistance is for you. Just noticing it will create new results. Taking small steps of action that's different from how you would normally proceed, even better. Okay, you guys, two quick things. Again, this will be the last podcast for this year. We'll start out the new episodes in January, and I'm gonna have the first episode be how to move through resistance. And check out the old podcast to fill in your time over these next few weeks. Some really good ones for coming into the new year are how to create a vision, how to create the cash flow you want in your business, and how to step into leader energy. And last but not least, I have a mastermind starting for coaches who want to create more clients and have more cash flow in their business. Enrollment for this mastermind closes December 13th, and our first group call starts December 18th. So there will be information in the show notes here, and send me an email if you would like to apply. This mastermind is really focused around helping coaches get more comfortable with taking aligned action and removing the resistance they have towards allowing themselves to create clients, conduct sales, and put themselves out there in the world in the way that they would most desire to do. All right, you guys, as always, thanks for joining me. Happy New Year. Ready to hire your own personal one-to-one mentor to help you take your life and your business to the next level? Go to my website where you can sign up for a no charge, no pressure consultation where we can get to know each other better. I get to hear your vision. I'll help you understand exactly what's getting in your way. And if it feels like a good fit and I believe I can help you, we'll talk about what it looks like to work together.